Okay, so the third part of this question says to describe the distribution. And for me, the easiest way to describe a distribution is to look at a histogram. That may be different for you, but for me, it definitely is the easiest way. Now, the interesting thing I notice, if you look back at this problem when we did the box and whiskers plot, is that 94 was actually an outlier. But if I do zoom 9 on my calculator here, so it's doing the statistical zoom, you actually don't see that outlier. So that's kind of just an interesting thing to note, that you may, in describing a distribution, want to have different, you may want to change the window, or you may want to look at different representations. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to change the window. And I'm going to say I want my x min to be 90 and my x max to be, let's say, 160. I just like it to be nice and even. And now this is the big question, though, is your x scale. What do you want your x to count by? So as I'm thinking about my x scale and what I want it to count by, I think that tens might be good. But thinking about that these numbers really only go from 94 to 145, tens may not show me enough. So I'm going to change my x scale to 5. So now let's see what this graph looks like, if that changes it. So it actually does provide us a picture that, maybe is a little bit more useful. It shows us some gaps in data, which might be interesting to describe. And it also does show us this outlier here at 94. It shows us a gap with the outlier, so that might be helpful to see. The other thing I could have used to show that outlier is that box and whiskers plot that I had. So we'll describe it first off of this, and then we'll look at the box and whiskers plot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up Microsoft Word to describe this distribution, so I can type while I talk here. Okay, so one thing as I look at this distribution that I notice is the distribution is approximately normal. It does look like it is slightly skewed to the right because my data, I have a little bit longer tail off here to the right. Okay. The median, so we can get that from our 5-number summary that we had. So at this point, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to switch this plot to a box and whiskers because that actually shows me a lot of information for my description here. So I'm going to do that and then zoom 9. Okay, and you can see that skew actually in a box and whiskers as well, that it's pulled off here. You've got a little bit longer tail off to the left. Oh, and see, I just caught myself there. My tail is on the left, so it is skewed to the left. Okay, so there is an outlier at 94 on the lower end. Okay, and remember we can do trace, and then it'll show us, we already know our outlier is 94. Looking here, notice that our median is actually on the upper end. So the median is 126.5. Remember, that's the middle number, which shows us that most of the data is on the higher end. This is also confirmed by the skewness. We'll call it skewness. Okay. So the median is 126. Okay. Q1 is 116 and Q3 is 130. And Q3 is 130, meaning that 50% of the data is between 116 and 130. Okay, you also have another 25% of the data is between 130 and 145. The max is 145, which means that 25% of the teams, remember this is the total home runs for the teams, of the teams had total home runs between 130 and 145. Okay, so that's a pretty, okay, so whereas 25% of the teams had between 94 and, what was our Q3 was 116 home runs. So thinking about that, you have 25% of the teams in this 15 range, and then you have 25% of the teams, and this is more than 20. So it takes, so it's more spread, oh, it is more spread out in the lower 25% of the teams than it is in the upper 25% of the teams. So thinking about sports here, that means that your lower 25%, there's more of a range. So thinking about how, if this is a measure of how good a team is, there's more of a range in your lower end. Your upper teams, your better teams, are more close together. So thinking about, okay, well, that might talk about their chances of going to the playoffs. If your upper teams are really close together, then that means that there's going to be quite a bit of change. There's a lot of variation that could happen in who ends up going to the playoffs if the upper part of your teams are closely tied together. Okay, so this is what you should see in a distribution, describing a distribution.